would then manipulate the equipment from one runway to land on another runway, and they would call it as such. Is that anywhere close to what you're looking for here?
No, it is not. but we give you points for effort, an A for effort here.
So how about descent gradients? Does that have anything to do with that?
Now we are starting to get somewhere.
So anything more than 400 nautical miles from the final approach fix to
400 nautical miles.
400 feet per nautical mile.
So that's correct. If anything more than 4-degree glide slope. Because what's going to happen is there's two reasons that we have a circling approach. The first of which is what you started talking about. Our localizer that was not lined up with the runway. Okay. But anytime that we have an approach course, a final approach course, this is outside of 30 degrees, outside the runway orientation, it's considered a circling approach. But that's where 95% of the pilots will stop. They think that, hey, it's a circling approach, and it's because it's not lined up. Well, in this particular scenario, because this is an airport that I go into on an almost daily basis, we have a localizer. It's lined straight up with the runway. But it's a localizer delta approach. It's circling. And the reason for that is because of terrain. The second reason that you can have a circling approach is because part of one of the things that we need in order to land from an instrument approach per Part 91 of the FARs is that we need to use normal maneuvers, leaving the MDA or just DA, use normal maneuvers in order to accomplish the landing. But if the rising terrain from the direction that we're coming doesn't allow you to use a normal descent rate, you have to circle. You're going to have to come out at MDA, but you're going to be too high over the top of the airport to actually land straight in. In which case, if you can't land straight in because you're too high, you have to circle for the runway. And that's why this particular airport at Gillespie is a localizer delta, is because it's, I think, about a 6.9 degree final descent angle, which is well outside of the 4 degrees. And that's why it's an actual circling approach.
So is that Rattlesnake Hill or whatever?
The Rattlesnake Hill is part of it. However, it's also even going out to the east. Rattlesnake Hill, you actually have to have visual. That one is, you have to have that in sight in order to land because you're really close to it. Yeah. But it's the rising terrain out to the east because of the topography and the geography around the area of San Diego and the rising terrain close to the east side of the city. Okay.
So a localizer delta means that it is only a circle to land approach because the MDA is way too high to make a normal approach to landing.
Correct. We have a localizer being our ground directional aid, but we can only circle. And that the reason for that is because of the terrain and the MDA and the descent rate.
Excellent. You know, I know it's back there somewhere in the in the encyclopedia of knowledge, but man, it's been a long time since I even thought about that.
You see all the stuff that the GA pilots of America have to put up with that you guys don't ever even think about.
Yeah, it's very, very true. You know, and my hat's off to the GA pilots, the charter pilots. I mean, we were just talking about this a couple episodes ago. It's like, man, I don't think I could do your job. I mean, you're on the phone constantly. You're doing everything from getting catering on the aircraft, making sure that the maintenance logbooks have been signed off and the flight plan was filed and the weather checks have been good, and you're doing it all. You know, we have what's called SOC for that, or MOC. Maintenance operation control or systems operation control. You know, we have, rooms full of people with, teams of computers all there waiting for
doing
us
all
to
your
just show up
for you.
All we got to do is show up. Well, the paperwork says I need this much fuel to take off. So that's how much fuel I'm going to have to take off. And well, why is that? I don't know. And I don't care. That's what the paperwork says.
That's what dispatch told me I needed. And that's good enough for me. And
when you're flying at especially maybe not so much at a regional airline or commuter airline, but when you're flying at a major airline, what are you doing 99% of the time? A full ILS. Daytime, nighttime, IFR, VFR, you're shooting an ILS. Occasionally, you're going into international destinations, you're going to shoot a GPS approach. In which case, it's a coupled autopilot GPS approach because the company prefers that you do it that way. If the weather is low, what are you doing? A Cat 3 auto land. What does that mean? That means the one or both or all three of the autopilots, depending on your equipment, are coupled to the ILS, and the plane is landing all by itself. All the captain and the first officer are doing are monitoring systems, making required callouts. And once the aircraft is on the runway, then it'll apply the brakes automatically. And when it gets to a certain speed, there's a speed call out. I believe 80 knots is the right call. And all of a sudden, the autopilot click, click, click comes off, and the captain resumes control of manipulating the aircraft on the ground. And that's what we do. So occasionally, some young hotshot GA pilot or private or corporate pilot will come in and go, "You airline guys, let's hear what's the definition of this." And we're like, I don't know.
But it gives the rest of us entertainment value because, as you know, you guys, you airline guys, Legacy Air, you have made it. You are the man. You work at Legacy Airline. And so we like to, or I speak on probably just my behalf, but I like to give you a hard time.
Yeah, you've been giving me a hard time for 20 years, my friend.
But I'd like to say thank you for indulging me and making fun of you just a little bit and hyping that up a little bit more than I even had to.
No, but I appreciate that. This is what we're here. This is what the Squawk Ident Podcast is all about. Yes, primarily we discuss about the journey in today's aviator, and when we can get interviews lined up, we definitely love hearing about everyone's unique journey and how they became the pilot that they are today. But in that process, we also talk about all of the hurdles that come along the way in this journey. And thank you so much for bringing this up because, I've seen occasionally we have, VOR Alphas in the book. We rarely ever have to perform them. Even in training, we don't really do much more than we usually do an ILS with the glide slope out of service. So it's a localizer only approach. We do a GPS approach or two. We do an ILS approach or two and a couple single engine approaches, precision and non-precision. Occasionally we do a VOR into JFK. At least that's what the Legacy likes to do. And which has these really cool lead-in lights and all the fun stuff.
VOR-13 left.
Exactly. Which has that been decommissioned?
I don't know. I just know that the VOR-13 left is something. JFK is something that all kinds of training departments have been using for decades.
Yep. And I got to say, one of the highlights of being based in New York for the time that I was there, when I was at Sandpiper, used to love shooting that approach, at a home airport. And that and the expressway visual in LaGuardia. Oh, that one's a good one. Do you have the tanks in sight? What? The tanks. Do you have the tanks? What are they talking about? Take a look at the expressway visual runway. What is it in LaGuardia? 29?
I don't remember. I remember doing one visual approach into LaGuardia, and yeah, it's like you fly. Like I didn't fly into there all that much, and it was at nighttime, and I'm trying to find all of these visual cues to look for, and LaGuardia is not the easiest airport to land at either.
No.
You're coming in and it's kind of out on the water, which is dark, and you're looking for all these visual cues as you come in, and the runway is not all that long either.
No, it's the expressway visual runway 31 into LaGuardia. In terms of the runway 31 is, what is it, 7,003 feet of runway available. Let's see here.
Maybe it was one of them had you turn like base to final inside of 2 miles or something.
That's the one.
No, maybe so that was it. And you have to be configured like on downwind because you're so tight coming into this runway.
Yeah. And I used to love that one. I think that one absolutely is my favorite. So when you're coming in on this chart, it's the 19-2 chart. If you're following along on Jeppeson's, the expressway visual runway 31, and you come in over Prospect Park, and you have to visually head over to Dials. Or you can go, usually, even under instrument conditions, you can go to Dials intersection. But you have to have the tanks in sight before they can clear you on this visual approach procedure. Now, when you look on the chart, it just says twin white tanks. And you think, how am I going to see twin white tanks out here? Well, they're huge propane or natural gas tanks. There are two of them. And they're huge, and you can't miss them. So as soon as you have the tanks in sight, they'll say, "Do you have the tanks in sight?" And you say, "Yes, I do." All right, you're clear the expressway visual runway 31 contact tower. So here you are. You head over to the tanks. You make a little bit of a right turn. You follow the expressway, the Long Island Expressway. You go around Citi Field.
I remember that part.
Yep. You don't want to go over it.
Got
to go around the stadium. And as you're turning from base to final, which is more than a 90-degree turn, by the way, so you should be fully configured, as slow as practical, and at an altitude that would be commensurate with a standard 3-degree glide path to the runway, because at that point, you're committed. If you're overshoot, undershoot, you're too high, you're too low, you're probably going to go around because you're low. And you turn that modified base to final, and you are right there. You're right there, and
you're on top of the runway.
So especially if there was a windy day and the winds were coming out of the south, you really had to bank it pretty good, get all lined up. And as soon as you turn final, what's right there? Part of the city dump where the birds are, seagulls are everywhere. So now you're like, final landing, birds. It could be a challenge. But 7,000 foot runways at LaGuardia, both of them, both intersecting runways. And on one of the runways, you land on an elevated portion of the runway that's a pier out into the water. And that's always fun. Runway, is it 2-1? 2-2. So, good times.